before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I wasn't looking for danger when I headed into the Nahanni. No one ever is. Not really. You tell yourself you're looking for silence, space, the kind of peace that only wilderness can give. You tell yourself you're ready. Maps marked, fuel topped, bear spray stashed under the front seat. But the Nahanni doesn't care what you came for. That place doesn't care who you are. And I didn't realize until too late that it isn't just the land that tests you. It's what the land pulls out of you. I was 42, recently divorced, with more bitterness than I wanted to admit, and an RV that felt more like home than any house I'd been in for the last 10 years. I'd been working a string of contract jobs, delivering long hauls across Canada, spending my off time wandering the edges of national parks, hiding from anything that looked like routine. That's how I found the Nahanni. Tucked in the Northwest Territories, barely spoken about outside hardcore backcountry forums, Nahanni National Park Reserve has a reputation. People talk about the South Nahanni River like it's sacred, hauntingly beautiful, untouchably remote. Places like Deadman Valley, Funeral Range, and Headless Creek. They sound made up until you realize the names came from real things. Real bodies. Decapitated ones sometimes. Vanished gold miners. Planes that crash and are never found. Cree legends older than memory, and yet somehow, despite all that, maybe because of it, it called to me. I planned it quiet, late August, when the bugs weren't as bad, but the air started whispering that winter wasn't far. I'd cross into the park boundaries with my Class C and camp off the edges of the access road near the Flat River Trail system. Solo, of course. The only way I ever really camped. No music, no phone signal, just the hum of the trees and whatever came with the dark. It started out calm enough, beautiful even. The road into the park was rough, barely more than a carving in the dirt, and my shocks took a beating. The further I went, the less tire tracks I saw. Civilization dropped off fast. Eventually it was just me, the RV, and trees that looked like they'd been watching long before people even came here. Pines twisted with time, cold wind threading through their limbs like breath. You feel small out there, stripped down. The first night, I parked beside a shallow turnoff near a rise in the terrain. Looked like it had once been a trailhead before nature took it back. No signposts, no other campers, just a wide patch of earth, perfect for tucking in under the stars. I grilled some canned stew, drank a bit of whiskey, and watched the sun bleed slow behind the ridge. The quiet was thick, too thick. I've slept in forests all over the country. The noise varies, frogs, owls, the occasional distant coyote, but this was different. There was no white noise, no insects, no breeze through the grass, just a deep, breathless stillness, like the entire forest was holding something back. I chalked it up to nerves. First night out always messes with the head. You get hyper-aware of every creak and echo, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was near, just outside the limits of what my headlights could reach. I left the outside light on. Now, didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 a.m. I heard the first knock. Just a single dull tap on the side of the RV. Not sharp. More like knuckles dragging slowly down the aluminum. I shot up in bed, heart racing. I held my breath and waited, thinking maybe it was a branch, maybe a gust of wind, but the trees weren't moving. There was no wind, just that same dead stillness. Then nothing. The next morning I walked around the RV, scanning for scratches or signs of animals. Nothing. Not even a print in the soft dirt. By the second night, I was 30 miles deeper. I'd made my way down an old forestry path that ended at a half-rotted bridge spanning a narrow gorge. The bridge looked too risky, so I parked just before it, the drop-off behind me and a clearing up front. It was beautiful, in a severe, unforgiving kind of way. The cliffs rose around the valley like ancient shoulders, and the river far below whispered in a voice I couldn't quite translate. That night, I built a small fire, more for company than heat. Something about that valley made me feel more alone than usual. Not the kind of solitude I craved, but the kind that sinks its teeth in. I tried to distract myself. I even took out an old journal I kept in the glove compartment, scribbling notes about the landscape, thoughts I might use for a blog someday. But my hand kept drifting, sketching, little figures, trees with eyes, faces in the rock. I hadn't drawn in years. When I finally turned in, I triple-checked the locks, bolted the side door, closed the blackout curtains. That's when I heard it again. This time, it was more deliberate. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, not on the door, on the back window, the one above the bed. I froze. Not the kind of freeze that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from knowing. Somewhere in your gut, your bones, your brain goes quiet and cold. I knew there was no one out there. I hadn't seen another human being in almost 2 days. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just lay there, heart hammering against the mattress, eyes locked on the ceiling. Then I heard the second sound. Footsteps. Not heavy ones. Not boots. Bare feet. Slow, dragging steps moving around the back corner of the RV, gravel crunching under a delicate weight. I reached under the bed and gripped the hunting knife I kept taped to the frame. My hands were slick with sweat. My body screamed to run, to throw open the door and drive. But I stayed. The footsteps circled, one side then the next. They stopped near the driver's side mirror. Then, a sound I will never forget. Breathing. Right against the glass, a long, shuddering inhale. Wet, too close, like someone exhaling with hunger. I couldn't bring myself to look. Then, just as suddenly, silence. The breathing stopped. The air settled. The world held its breath with me. And then I heard something inside. Something I still can't explain. From the kitchenette, the sound of water dripping, but the faucet was off. I'd checked it before bed. Drip, 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 then a whisper. Low, croaked. From the darkness beyond the curtains, go home. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the cab with the engine off, knife clutched in both hands, eyes fixed on the curtains like they might suddenly open themselves. I didn't move, didn't dare breathe too loud. Every shadow outside felt like it had mass. Every creak of the RV seemed too deliberate, like something was testing the weight of the world around me. But morning came. Slowly, reluctantly, like the sun was rising through molasses. The light didn't feel warm. It felt clinical, pale and empty, like it had no power to chase away what had been outside just hours earlier. Still, I unbolted the door and stepped out. There were no footprints, not around the windows, not under the side mirror, nothing. But on the back window, I saw it. A smudge, long, greasy, like someone had dragged a bare palm down the glass. 5 faint streaks, each ending in a point. Not quite human, not quite animal. I stared at it until my chest tightened. That was the moment I should have turned back. Every instinct, every part of my gut that was still intact screamed at me to leave, to get out while I still could. But I didn't. Why? Because some of us were wired for damage. It wasn't pride, it wasn't thrill-seeking. It was something quieter, deeper, a stubborn need to prove that I could face what scared me, that I wasn't weak, that maybe, after all the things that had been stripped from me in life, I could still choose to keep going, even when everything in the forest told me not to. So I stayed, packed up the RV, took a long loop around the clearing, and found another path further north. No markers, just a faint track through the pine needles, wide enough for a determined vehicle to push through. I took it slow, tires chewing softly at the forest floor. About 3 miles in, I found a spot that looked untouched. A natural bowl, ringed by high trees, with a rocky ridge to the west that blocked most of the wind. I parked dead center. No fire that night. No dinner either. My stomach had turned, my head throbbed, and something in the silence had shifted. It was no longer blank. It was watching. The forest wasn't passive anymore. It was leaning in. You ever feel that? When a place presses against your skin without touching you? When your ears ring not from sound but from the weight of attention? Like the trees were conferring. Like they knew you. That night, I tried something different. I opened the window blinds. If something was going to be out there, I wanted to see it. I stayed in the passenger seat, facing forward, knife across my lap, a flashlight in one hand. The woods ahead of me were motionless. My headlights were off. No sound. Just the moon, peeking weakly through cloud cover, barely lighting the silhouette of the trees. Around midnight, the RV shifted. Not hard. Not violent. Just enough to rock the suspension gently, like someone was testing the weight again. I flicked the flashlight on, aiming it toward the side window. Nothing. Then I heard a click. The back door latch. My blood turned to ice. That latch had been locked. I double-checked it before settling in, but I heard it. I know I heard it. A soft metallic snap, like something had tested it, found it sealed, and moved on. The worst part? I didn't run. I didn't even speak. I sat there, paralyzed, listening. The silence didn't just return, it deepened, turned viscous. The only comparison I can give you is the moment before an earthquake, when everything holds still, but you feel the pressure shift beneath your feet. Then came the scratching, not nails, not claws. A single fingertip, dragging, across the roof. It moved slow, like it was tracing something, a pattern. I followed the sound with my eyes, mapping the movement in my head, left to right, front to back. Then it stopped, dead center. And again, the voice. Softer this time, directly above me. You don't belong. I turned the ignition. I don't remember making the decision. I just moved, like something broke loose inside me, and all the logic, all the denial I'd held on to, shattered in a single heartbeat. The RV coughed once, then roared to life. I slammed it into drive and tore out of the bowl, tires spinning in soft earth, bouncing over roots and rocks as I forced the vehicle back toward the main path. Tree branches clawed the sides, scraping like fingernail, but I didn't care. I didn't stop. I didn't even look in the mirrors. I drove for hours. Didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't speak. Just kept the wheel straight, foot steady, eyes locked on the ever-brightening horizon. When I finally reached the ranger checkpoint outside the southern boundary, the sun was just cresting. I looked like hell. Pale, soaked in sweat, eyes bloodshot. A younger ranger, maybe mid-20s, flagged me down and asked if everything was all right. I wanted to tell him. I needed to tell someone. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Because what could I say? That a voice in the forest told me I didn't belong? That invisible hands traced my windows while I slept? That something had walked barefoot around my RV in the middle of the night, whispering things it shouldn't have known? He waved me through, didn't push, and I drove. I didn't stop until I reached Fort Simpson. I booked a motel room, slept for 2 straight days. When I woke up, I sold the RV. I haven't camped since, but that's not the end of the story. Not really, because the thing about Nahanni, the thing they don't put in the guidebooks, the thing the maps can't show, is that it stays with you. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes to that tap, tap, tap on the window that isn't there. Still feel that pressure when I stand near a tree line, like something old and wild remembers me. Still hear that whisper when the wind moves just right. You don't belong. It's strange the way memory works. You'd think the fear would fade, dull itself over time like an old scar, but it doesn't. Not if what you experienced didn't make sense. And Nahanni never made sense. That's the part that digs deepest. Not the fear, not even the danger, the wrongness of it all. Like reality was stretched thin up there, like there were folds in the forest where other things crept through. I moved on with my life. At least I told myself I did. Took a job down in Oregon, office work, safe, routine. I traded campfires for fluorescent lights, ranger maps for spreadsheets. But even surrounded by people, even with pavement under my feet, I'd sometimes flinch at random sounds. The creak of an old chair, the flutter of birds outside my window. My mind would jerk back to that place, to the way the wind had watched me, to the voice that knew I was trespassing. I stopped talking about it altogether. People don't believe you when your story doesn't fit into a tidy box. They nod politely, they laugh afterward. I even tried telling myself it was just stress, hallucination, sleep deprivation, all the rational excuses we invent when something pierces our reality and we can't sew it back shut. But last fall, something happened that unraveled that illusion for good. I was in Calgary visiting family. My cousin Mitch had just bought an old hunting trailer from a guy who used to run seasonal tours out west. Said it had good bones. Asked if I'd help him haul it to his property near Banff. I didn't want to. Every part of me tensed at the idea of being in the woods again, even for a short trip. But I couldn't say no. So we loaded up and drove out. It was the second night on his property, just before dusk, when we were digging around in the trailer's old lockbox. Most of it was junk. Old keys, faded topo maps, a hand-cranked flashlight. But then I found the journal. Leather-bound, water-warped, with initials burned into the cover. JDH Mitch didn't recognize the name, thought maybe it belonged to the guy who sold it. Said I could keep it if I was curious. And I was. That night, back at the cabin, I opened it. Most of the writing was hard to read, weathered ink, smudged by time, but some entries were clear. March 14th, saw tracks again near Glacier Lake. Not human, long stride, deep impressions, no toes visible. April 2nd, camped near Rabbit Kettle. Something walked past around 3 a.m., didn't hear it, just felt it, like pressure in my lungs. Woke up choking. April 5th, dreams are getting worse. Always the same voice. You don't belong. I froze. The pen dropped from my hand. My mouth went dry. I hadn't told anyone about what I heard. Not a soul. Yet here it was, word for word. Same phrasing, same cadence. The journal was dated 1993. That man, JDH, had camped in the same general area as me. He'd heard the voice, felt the pressure, seen something he couldn't explain, and judging by the last entry, he didn't leave either. April 12th. Going deeper tomorrow. They're waiting. Not afraid anymore. Maybe I never belonged to begin with. There was no April 13th. No sign of what happened to him. Just that line, that choice to walk further in. My hands trembled as I closed the book. The room felt colder, like something had stepped through the years and found me again. That's when I understood. The forest didn't just whisper to the lost. It remembered them, tracked them, called them back. And for some reason, it had marked me. That night, I dreamt of fog, thick and gray, swallowing the pines. I was standing at the edge of the clearing I'd parked in years ago, and across from me stood a figure, tall, indistinct, but familiar. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. A man, weathered face, beard streaked with frost, and eyes like twin pits, black but brimming with recognition. He lifted a hand, pointed toward the trees. And again I heard it. Come home. I woke gasping, sheets damp with sweat, heart jackhammering. I didn't sleep again that night. I couldn't. Because here's the thing. When something calls you once and you escape, it might be coincidence. But when it reaches across time, across people, across dreams, it's something else. Nahanni wasn't finished with me. I left Calgary the next day, drove south, avoided the woods. I kept the journal, though. I don't know why. Part of me thinks it's a warning. Part of me fears it's a key. I've started noticing things, birds that stop chirping when I walk by, static on the radio when I pass forested roads, dreams that bleed into waking hours. And sometimes, only sometimes, I hear footsteps when no one's behind me. I tell myself it's stress, that it's in my head. But deep down I know better. Nahanni isn't just a place. It's a threshold, and once you cross it, even just once, something crosses into you. I used to believe in boundaries, between the natural and the supernatural, between the rational and the impossible. I don't anymore, because sometimes the forest remembers, and sometimes it follows. There's something you need to understand about Nahanni. It doesn't chase you in the way you think it might. It doesn't send wolves or monsters or some shadowed figure sprinting toward your firelight. That would be too easy. You'd scream, run, survive, maybe even laugh about it one day. No, what Nahanni does is wait. It waits while the memory corrodes your confidence, while the sound of wind starts to sound like whispers, while your own reflection in windows, in mirrors, in still water starts to look a little too still, a little too wrong. Nahanni breaks you slowly. And I was breaking. It started with the RV. I had driven out one weekend to escape the city noise, just a remote little pull-out spot east of Glacier. I wanted air, trees, stillness. But the second I turned off the ignition and stepped out, I felt it. That pressure, that awful awareness, like I wasn't alone, like the air was watching. I tried to brush it off, poured some coffee, walked around the site, but nothing felt grounded. The birds didn't sing, the trees didn't sway. It was like I'd stepped into a photograph, beautiful, sure, but frozen, staged. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the RV felt like breath on the back of my neck. Around 3 a.m., the knocking started, not loud, not urgent, just soft, deliberate. 5 knocks, always 5. Then silence. I didn't check. I didn't move. I just sat there, gripping my knife, staring at the door until dawn. When light finally cracked through the blinds, I flung it open and found nothing. No footprints. No animals. Just one thing out of place, a single pine cone sitting dead center on my step. Now, maybe that doesn't mean much to you, but I hadn't seen pine trees in that clearing. Not a single one. It was mostly fir and aspen. So that cone, that was a message. I left immediately, didn't even pack up fully, just threw things in the back and drove. Drove fast, too fast. Like if I just outran the horizon, I could outrun it, but that's not how this works. A few weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. An older man's voice came through the line, rasped and urgent. "You found his journal," he said. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. "I saw it," he continued. You opened the door. He opened it first. You followed. You need to close it. Then the line went dead. No name, no number to call back. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, blood cold, because I knew exactly what he meant. I hadn't just read that man's journal. I'd retraced him. I'd stepped into his footprints mentally, spiritually, maybe even physically. That's how it works. You don't have to chant anything. Don't have to spill blood or light candles. You just have to follow. And then something follows you back. The dreams intensified after that. The man with the black eyes wasn't alone anymore. There were others, shapes that hovered just beyond my periphery, crawling things, figures crouched in the tree lines. They didn't move like people, they moved like ideas, twitchy and wrong. I'd wake up with my sheets soaked, sometimes with scratches on my arms, legs, even my ribs. I stopped going outside, stopped answering calls. Friends thought I was sick, depressed, maybe both. But none of them felt what I did. None of them had tasted the air in that valley. Because that's the worst part, the air. There's something in it. It's why you can't think clearly up there. Why people disappear without a trace. It's not the terrain, it's not the wildlife. It's that the valley wants you, not to eat you, not to kill you, to keep you, to twist you into something it can use. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back. Not because I was brave, not because I thought I could fix anything, but because I was already gone. Every day spent in the city, I felt myself slipping. Like my reflection wasn't mine anymore. Like my thoughts had an echo. Like I was walking around in the suggestion of a person. So I packed my RV, brought the journal, told no one, and I drove north. All the way up, the land grew quieter, colder, like it knew I was coming. No radio static, no cars, just the mountains rising like the ribs of some sleeping god. I crossed into Nahanni in early October. Frost had just begun creeping in, painting the edges of the spruce with white. I parked at the same spot, Glacier Lake. My boots hit the ground and everything in me shrank, but I kept walking, deeper, past the ridges, past the place where the path ends and the moss starts to squelch underfoot. I found the cairn, just like before, but this time I didn't run. I knelt, took the journal, placed it at the base, whispered, "He's not forgotten." And then something moved in the trees. Not walked, moved like mist twisting against wind. It didn't take form, not really. But I felt it. Not evil, not kind. Just vast, old, aware. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath came in thick white clouds. My teeth chattered, and then from somewhere behind me, close, impossibly close, came a voice. Not in my ears, in my bones. "You came back." I turned. There was no one there. But the trees had changed. They weren't swaying, they were bending, leaning toward me, like they were listening, like they were deciding. I stood still, heart thudding. Then, just like that, the cold broke. Birds chirped again, the air warmed, the shadows drew back. Whatever test I had faced, I had passed it. Or maybe it had just let me go. I didn't speak on the drive back, didn't turn on music, didn't answer my phone, didn't think. I just listened. To the tires on gravel, to the wind carving through spruce, to the quiet, steady pulse of being alive, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not really. I crossed the Nahanni boundary line just before dusk. Behind me, the peaks caught fire in the last light, deep red like blood and iron. But it wasn't angry. It felt like a farewell. Not to me necessarily, but to the part of me it kept, because something did stay behind. I've never been the same since that trip. I don't mean that in some vague, philosophical way. I mean it literally. My heart beats slower now. I don't dream the way I used to. I see shapes out of the corner of my eye that no one else sees. Flickers of movement in mirrors, in puddles, in the stillness between streetlights. I wake up with moss on my sheets. I hear 5 knocks some nights, soft and slow, on the far side of the RV wall. But I'm not afraid. Not anymore. Because I understand something most campers never will. Nahanni isn't just dangerous because of wolves or cliffs or cold. Those things, they can kill you, yes. But they don't change you. Not in your bones. Nahanni is dangerous because it is watching. It's patient. It chooses. It doesn't want all of you. Just the ones who listen, the lost, the grieving, the ones running not from something behind, but towards something they can't explain. Something that calls to them in dreams, in tremors, in rustling trees, and voices on dead phone lines. And when it calls, you'll go. Even if you say you won't. Even if you think you're smarter, tougher, more grounded. You'll go because somewhere inside you, you already know. This world isn't just maps and roads and science. There are places older than logic, trails that curve into memory, lakes that reflect not your face, but your fear. Nahanni is one of those places. You don't conquer it, you don't tame it, you survive it, if it lets you. And if you're lucky, you come back not with photos, but with truth. Truth about how fragile you really are. Truth about the difference between being alone and being seen. Because that's the scariest thing of all. Not being watched, not even being hunted, but being understood by something that shouldn't understand anything at all. When I finally got home, I parked the RV and just sat there for a long while, hand on the ignition, staring at my own front door. It felt strange, too straight, too clean, like someone else's life. Eventually I walked inside, showered, ate, slept on a real mattress for the first time in weeks. But that night I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. The house was silent. No wind, no creaks, just silence. Until 5 knocks, soft, measured, somewhere far off, or maybe inside. I didn't check. I didn't need to, because it wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder, a promise. Once you've heard Nahanni, it never unsays your name. It just waits. For the next time you forget what fear feels like. For the next time your pride outweighs your instinct. For the next time you think you're alone out there. So to anyone thinking of going, of dry camping in the territories, of chasing silence in the last wild spaces of North America, I won't tell you not to go. That wouldn't stop you anyway. But I'll say this. Bring more than gear. Bring more than gas and bear spray and backup radios. Bring your truth. Bring your doubts. Bring the version of yourself you've been too scared to meet. Because Nahanni doesn't take your body. It takes your lies. And when you're standing on that riverbank, watching the mist rise and the trees lean in, when you feel the hush fall over the forest and your breath catch in your throat, you'll realize something simple, something terrifying. You were never the one doing the camping. You were the one being invited, and every invitation has a price. Nahanni's is simple. Come as you are, leave as something else. I never wanted to drive Loveland Pass again. I hadn't been back on that stretch of road since the night Marty died. The night his rig went over the edge and disappeared into the fog like it had never existed. The only thing they found was twisted metal at the bottom of the canyon. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but the guilt stuck to me like oil on a rag, refusing to wash off no matter how many miles I put between me and that place. But Pete called in a favor. He needed me, and I owed him more than I could count. A convoy job through the Rockies, 3 trucks hauling high-value cargo to a research facility in Colorado. It was big money, but more than that, it was for Pete. He convinced me with a laugh over the phone, "Come on, Red, we need your experience out here. What could go wrong?" I didn't laugh, not this time. So there I was, back in the driver's seat of my rig, with Pete leading the convoy and another trucker, Jerry, bringing up the rear. The snow-capped peaks of the Rockies loomed ahead as we started our ascent through Loveland Pass. The winding roads snaked around the mountains, a narrow, dangerous route where one wrong move could send you tumbling into nothingness. The memories hit hard as soon as we passed the first switchback, the same stretch where Marty had lost control. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the familiar weight of regret in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding convoys, always driving solo. The ghosts from that night hadn't let me forget, and now I was back, like I was inviting them to haunt me all over again. "Red, you still with us?" Pete's voice crackled over the CB, cutting through my thoughts. I pressed the mic. "Yeah, still here. Roads are getting slick. We should take it slow." Pete agreed, and we settled into the grind, navigating the treacherous turns with caution. The sun had set hours ago, and now only the thin beams of our headlights cut through the growing darkness. The fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the edges of the road like ghostly fingers. That's when I saw it up ahead. Just barely visible through the fog was a pair of headlights. They flickered like a dying flame, appearing and disappearing in the swirling mist. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. It was a truck, no doubt about it. But there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it hugged the curves of the road like it had been driving this route for years. I keyed the mic again. "Pete, you see that truck up ahead?" Silence. Then Pete's voice came through, confused. "There's no truck, Red. Just us." I glanced in the mirror. Jerry's headlights were still behind me, steady and unchanging. But the truck in front, it wasn't one of ours. I let go of the mic, my gut tightening. Maybe it was a local driver, someone familiar with the area. But as I watched it more closely, I knew that wasn't right. The truck was old, real old, the kind of rig you didn't see much on the road anymore. And then it hit me, hard and fast. The paint job, the faded red stripe down the side, the same color as the one Marty had on his rig. My chest tightened. No, I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It couldn't be Marty's truck. It was gone, destroyed, crumpled at the bottom of a canyon. But this was his rig. It had to be. The headlights flickered again, and then the truck was gone, swallowed by the fog like it had never been there. "Red, you good back there?" Pete's voice crackled through again. I didn't respond right away. My pulse was racing, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced around, looking for any sign of the truck, but the road was empty. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice shaky. "Just seeing things." But I wasn't seeing things. Not this time. We kept moving, the road winding higher, the fog thickening, the curves grew sharper, and the guardrails seemed to disappear into the mist, making it feel like we were driving on the edge of the world. That's when the CB crackled again, but this time, it wasn't Pete or Jerry's voice. "Red, you gotta help me." The voice was faint, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. My heart stopped. "Marty?" I whispered, disbelief creeping into my voice. The radio stayed silent for a moment, but then it came again, clearer this time, like the words were being dragged through the static. "Red, help me. I can't hold on." I dropped the mic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Marty was dead, gone, but that voice, it was his. Down to the rasp he always had when he called me Red. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet here it was, crackling through the radio like a ghost from the past. I tried to shake it off, I tried to convince myself it was just some weird interference. But the road ahead seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, like the mountains themselves were trying to trap us in. I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see the ghost truck reappear. But there was nothing, just the thick, swirling fog. "Pete, something's not right," I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should stop, let the fog clear." "Negative, Red. We've got a tight schedule. Keep moving." His response was sharp, almost panicked. Pete wasn't the type to scare easily, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He knew something was wrong too, but he didn't want to say it. The fog pressed in closer, and suddenly the road didn't feel familiar anymore. I'd driven this pass more times than I could count, but now it was like the route had changed. The turns were sharper, the drops steeper. I didn't know where we were headed anymore. And then I saw the truck again. It appeared out of the fog, closer this time, swerving wildly across the road. The old, rusted cab, the faded red stripe. It was Marty's rig, no doubt about it. But when I pulled alongside, there was no driver. The cab was empty, the windows fogged over from the inside. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, swerving to avoid the ghost truck, but it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had come. My truck fishtailed, tires screeching against the wet pavement, but I managed to hold it steady. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Red, what the hell's going on back there?" Pete's voice snapped through the radio. "I saw him," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. "I saw Marty's truck." Silence hung in the air for a long moment. I knew Pete was processing what I'd said, trying to figure out if I was losing it or if there was something more. But before he could respond, the CB crackled again. Marty didn't make it. It wasn't Pete. It wasn't Jerry. It was Marty. His voice filled the cab, clearer than before, as if he was sitting right next to me. "You let me go, Red. You let me fall." I clenched the wheel, anger and fear boiling in my chest. "I didn't let you fall. I tried, Marty. You didn't try hard enough." The road twisted again, sharper this time, and I could barely see the guardrail through the fog. But I kept driving, adrenaline coursing through me as Marty's voice echoed in my head. Suddenly, Pete's voice cut through the chaos. "Red, you gotta snap out of it. This isn't real." "It's the mountains messing with you," I snapped back. "Messing with me. Don't act like you don't hear him, Pete." Pete didn't answer. The road ahead dipped sharply, and I saw it, the same curve where Marty had gone over, the same stretch of road where his truck had disappeared into the canyon. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Was that where this was leading? Was I about to relive Marty's crash? Marty, I'm sorry, I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter as the road curved dangerously toward the edge. I'm so damn sorry. The fog lifted just enough for me to see what was ahead. Marty's truck in the middle of the road, blocking the pass. There was no time to stop, no time to think. I swerved hard, avoiding the ghost truck at the last second. My rig skidded, the wheels screeching as I fought to keep control. For a moment, I thought I was going over the edge. The wheels teetered on the lip of the canyon, the guardrail creaking under the weight of the truck. But I yanked the wheel, pulling the rig back onto solid ground. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror. The ghost truck was gone. The fog was clearing, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Red? Pete's voice came over the radio, softer now. You still with us? Yeah, I whispered, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. I'm still here. The mountain stretched ahead, empty and quiet, but I could still hear Marty's voice in the back of my mind, and I knew, in some way, he'd always be with me. We made it through the pass just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the jagged peaks. The road ahead was clear, but I knew I'd never forget the night I'd faced Marty's ghost. I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment, I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted. Isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost stories book I found at a thrift store, some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp. A few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows, it was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old, things broke, but the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement, something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still, too still. The kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved, just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it. Faint, like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Get a grip, Jake, I muttered. It's just the wind. I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows, as if someone or something had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here, at least no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting, but nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump. Nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong, but everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange, deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large. Too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there in the dirt were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around, nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight, a loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting. But it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted, the fog was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. My name is Zeke Thomas, and this happened to me on September 14th, 2000. I had just bought an old RV from a buddy of mine, Sam Parsons. He swore it was a steal, so I took him at his word and set off to explore some quieter parts of Colorado. I figured it was a good excuse to take a break from my job at the warehouse and enjoy a bit of solitude. The RV wasn't fancy, but it had a bed, a small kitchen, and enough space to feel comfortable. The first couple of days were uneventful. I drove through small towns, stopping at diners for coffee and pie, and making idle conversation with the locals. By the third day, I found a secluded spot by a lake near the edge of a dense forest. It was perfect. No cell signal, no other campers, just peace and quiet. I parked the RV, set up a folding chair by the water, and cracked open a beer. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the lake, and I felt a deep sense of calm. This was what I needed. As night fell, I lit a small campfire and cooked up some hot dogs. The crackling fire and the distant hoots of an owl were the only sounds I could hear. It was idyllic. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I doused the fire, locked up the RV, and crawled into bed. I slept like a rock until around 3 a.m. when I was jolted awake by a loud thud against the side of the RV. I sat up, groggy and disoriented, and listened. At first, I thought it might be a bear or a deer, but the thud continued, more rhythmic and deliberate than any animal I had ever encountered. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside, shining the beam around the perimeter of the RV. The forest was silent, and there was no sign of anything unusual. I convinced myself it was just the wind or a branch falling from a tree and went back inside. But as soon as I laid down, the thud started again. This time, accompanied by a scraping sound, like nails on metal. Heart pounding, I searched the RV for something to defend myself with, and settled on a rusty old tire iron I found under the sink. I stepped outside again, circling the RV with the flashlight in one hand and the tire iron in the other. This time I noticed something strange. Deep, jagged scratches running along the side of the RV, too high up to have been made by any animal I knew of. I decided then and there to pack up and leave at first light. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. I barely slept, lying in bed with the tire iron at my side, ears straining for any sound. When the first light of morning crept through the windows, I threw on my clothes, fired up the RV, and drove out of there as fast as I could. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I'd been alone too long and was jumping at shadows. I drove for hours, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me. By afternoon, I found a small gas station and pulled in to refuel. The attendant, a wiry old man with a sun-weathered face, noticed the scratches on the RV and asked what had happened. I shrugged and told him it was probably a bear. He gave me a long, hard look. "Bears don't make scratches like that," he said, "and they don't knock." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. I decided to head to the nearest town and get a proper mechanic to look at the RV. I figured it wouldn't hurt to have someone else check it out. Maybe they'd see something I missed. The town of Red Cliff was small but charming. I found a mechanic, Hank, who agreed to take a look at the RV. As he inspected the scratches, his brow furrowed. "These aren't from any animal I know," he said. "And I've been out here my whole life. Looks like something tried to get in." "What do you mean, tried to get in?" I asked. Hank straightened up and looked at me. "I mean, whatever did this wasn't just messing around. It was trying to get inside." I felt a chill run down my spine. I thanked Hank, paid him for his time, and decided to stay at a motel for the night. I needed a shower and a good night's sleep that didn't involve being woken up by mysterious noises. The motel was old but clean, and the woman at the front desk was friendly. I asked her if there were any strange stories or local legends about the area, half joking, but she shook her head. "Nothing like that around here," she said. "It's usually pretty quiet." That night, I slept soundly in the motel bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I decided to cut my trip short and head back home. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. I made it home without incident and parked the RV in my driveway. For a while, life returned to normal. I went back to work, met up with friends, and tried to forget about the strange encounter. But every so often, I'd catch myself staring at the scratches on the RV, wondering what had really happened. A few weeks later, I ran into Sam at a bar. He asked me how the RV trip had gone, and I told him about the scratches and the noises. He listened, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "I probably should have mentioned this earlier," he said, lowering his voice, "but when I had that RV, something similar happened to me. I just thought I was imagining things." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. Sam sighed. "One night, I heard banging on the RV. Scratches appeared the next morning, just like yours. I didn't think much of it, but now I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What do you think it is?" I asked. Sam shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not just an animal." We sat in silence for a while, nursing our beers. Eventually, we changed the subject, but the unease lingered. A few days later, I got a call from Hank, the mechanic. He sounded rattled. "Zeke, I think you should see this. Can you come by the shop?" When I arrived, Hank led me to the back of the shop where the RV was parked. He pointed to a section of the scratches I hadn't noticed before. Embedded in the metal were small, sharp pieces of what looked like bone or claw. "I sent these to a buddy of mine who was a biologist," Hank said. "He couldn't identify them. Said they're like nothing he's ever seen." I stared at the fragments, feeling a growing sense of dread. "What does that mean?" I asked. Hank shrugged. "I don't know, but it means whatever did this isn't from around here." I thanked Hank and drove home, my mind racing. Over the next few weeks, I became more paranoid. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside made me jump. I even bought a shotgun and kept it by my bed, just in case. Then one night, the noises started again. This time, it was coming from outside my house. I grabbed the shotgun and peered out the window, but saw nothing. The noises continued, louder and more insistent. I stepped outside, shotgun at the ready, and circled the house. In the dim light, I saw movement near the RV. I raised the shotgun, my heart pounding. Slowly, I approached. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. As I rounded the corner, I saw it, a hunched, shadowy figure clawing at the side of the RV. My breath caught in my throat. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had long, bony limbs, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the flashlight's beam. It turned toward me, its face twisted in a grotesque snarl. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and then it lunged. I fired the shotgun, the blast echoing through the night. The creature recoiled, letting out a piercing screech. I fired again, and it stumbled back, disappearing into the trees. My hands were shaking, and I could barely breathe. I ran inside, locking the doors and windows, and called the police. By the time they arrived, the creature was long gone. They searched the area but found nothing. The only evidence was the fresh scratches on the RV and the shotgun shell casings on the ground. They took my statement but didn't seem convinced. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I talked to Sam, and he suggested we get rid of the RV. Maybe it was attracting whatever that thing was. Reluctantly, I agreed. We drove it out to a junkyard and left it there, hoping it would be the end of our troubles. For a while, it seemed to work. The noises stopped, and the scratches didn't reappear. But the sense of unease never really left. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye or hear a faint scratching in the night. I moved to a new house, far away from the old one, hoping for a fresh start. But some nights I still wake up to the sound of scratching, and I wonder if it's out there, looking for me. I've never seen it again, but I have a name for it now. A name that fits the fear it brings, the Haggard. So that's my story. I don't expect you to believe it, but it happened. And if you ever hear scratching in the night, take my advice. Don't ignore it. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Tate Evans, slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 16 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast. But the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well, but now my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. Tate. The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. Tate, help me. I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. Who is this? No answer. Just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time, clearer, like the static was peeling away. Tate, why didn't you come back? I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner. The guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. Get a grip, Slick, I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be. Just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights, blinking faintly just off the edge of the road where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog. But these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat. A slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. Jack. The voice hit me again. This time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. Stop it, I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. You're not real. But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the sea, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown. The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea, and now, here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed, and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive. Something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear. Come back, Tate. The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing wasn't just cargo, it was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful, and it had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate, as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer. Fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated. And among them, I saw Dave, his eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. You left me. His voice echoed in my head. You left me to die. I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water, back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. I'm sorry, I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you. Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifacts slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet. But the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me. Not yet. And neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore are fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker. A stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path. Now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me. Alone. In the fog. Okay, I muttered. You've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. Hey, I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. You lost too? The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off, his clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes like he wasn't entirely there. I've been walking for days, he said, his voice hoarse. The trail, it keeps changing. Are you okay? I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. No one's okay out here. I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. What do you mean? The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave. I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate?" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." "The forest?" I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside. Water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange, shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, enjoying the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite, deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life. Birds, insects, something. but the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique one I'd brought along to mess around with during my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing, until now. I stood up from the fire, walking over to the RV and ducking inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again, 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere, maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing, I was sure, but the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong, like the message wasn't for just anyone, like it was for me. I shut the radio off, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods, the towering pines looming overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, made me uneasy. I stepped back outside, trying to push the growing sense of unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there. Tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. I heard it too. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals, glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes were constantly scanning the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what? Before I could ask more, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. Then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I could barely whisper back, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "We see you." The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I stood up, flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy, like the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once, I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles, the battery draining faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 137. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device pulsing with an eerie cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices all crashed into me at once in an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV. The lights followed me, the clicking never far behind. But I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper. Even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, it didn't stop. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 137. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul, just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit, the kind of tired that sneaks up on you, where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally, I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. I felt a wave of relief when I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent. Dry, with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose, but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff. No names or crude drawings. These were symbols, spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open and the smell hit me harder inside, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them, carved into the tiles drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go. But the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold, too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone. Just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second, I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through, low, distorted. Frank! My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me, not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. Come on, I muttered, trying to stay calm. Don't do this to me now. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, no bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, Closer now, another figure appeared near the picnic table and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone. Just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared. Every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out of here, on foot if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat just in case and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building, the carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. Frank. I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there. No figures, no man in the coat. Just the voice coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Frank, you need to stay. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it. Low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices. I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered, and I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Road 50 anymore. Not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. My name is Sterling Mason, and this happened to me on October 15th, 1995. It's a story I never thought I'd share, but here we are. I was always a skeptic, never one to believe in ghosts or monsters. My buddies and I decided to take a trip to an obscure campsite in the backwoods of Montana. We had our RV packed with everything we needed for a weekend of fishing, drinking, and general good times. The group was me, Mike Thatcher, and Sam Peters. We were childhood friends, tight as ever despite all the years that had passed. We'd been planning this trip for months. Mike was the outdoorsman, the guy who could start a fire with 2 sticks. Sam, on the other hand, was a tech geek, but still loved the idea of roughing it out in nature. Me, I just needed a break from my job at the factory, something different from the daily grind. The campsite was about 10 miles off the main road, deep enough into the woods that we wouldn't see another soul for the whole weekend. We set up camp next to a small lake, the water calm and inviting. The first day was perfect. We fished, drank beer, and laughed about old times. That night, sitting around the fire, Sam was showing us the new satellite phone he brought along. He was always the one to have the latest gadget. Mike teased him, saying, "Why'd you bring that thing? We're supposed to be off the grid." Sam just shrugged. You never know when you might need it. After a few hours, we turned in. The RV was cozy, and the beer helped me fall asleep fast. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to take a leak. I stepped outside. The night was pitch black, except for the light of the moon reflecting off the lake. The silence was deafening. As I was finishing up, I heard something rustling in the bushes behind me. I figured it was just a raccoon or something, so I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. The next morning, Mike and Sam were already up and about. Mike was by the lake, trying to catch breakfast, while Sam was tinkering with his gadgets. "Morning, sleepyhead," Sam said as I stumbled out of the RV. I grabbed a cup of coffee and joined Mike by the water. He seemed a bit on edge, not his usual laid-back self. "Everything all right?" I asked. He just nodded. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well. Kept hearing noises." The second day went by without much happening, but that night, things got weird. We were all in the RV playing cards and laughing about some stupid joke Mike made when we heard it, a distant scream. It wasn't an animal, it was human. We all froze, listening. Then it came again, louder and more desperate. Mike grabbed the flashlight and headed outside. "Stay here," he said. But Sam and I weren't about to let him go alone. We followed the sound, moving deeper into the woods. The screams turned into frantic cries for help. "Hello? Who's there?" Mike called out. The cries stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was even more unsettling. We searched around but found nothing. No sign of anyone. We headed back to the RV, unsettled but trying to brush it off. "Probably some pranksters," Mike said, but none of us believed it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard something scratching at the RV door. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to hear. The scratching got louder, more insistent. I nudged Mike awake. "Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment, then nodded. Grabbing his hunting knife, we crept to the door and flung it open, but there was nothing there, just the dark, empty campsite. The next morning, Sam was gone. We searched the campsite, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. His phone, his gadgets, everything was still there. Panic set in. We had no choice but to use the satellite phone to call for help. The nearest ranger station was hours away, but they promised to send someone out. We waited, anxiety gnawing at us. The rangers arrived by noon, but they didn't find anything either. They assured us they'd keep looking and advised us to stay put. Mike and I were wrecks, barely speaking. We just sat by the fire, staring into the flames, jumping at every sound. That night, I had the first watch. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside the RV. I woke Mike and we grabbed our flashlights. Stepping out into the cold night, we saw them, bare footprints leading away from the RV into the woods. They were too large to be Sam's and definitely not ours. We followed the tracks, hearts pounding. They led to a clearing, and that's when we saw it, a figure, hunched over, tearing into something on the ground. We shone our lights on it, and it turned to face us. It wasn't human, at least not completely. Its eyes glowed in the light, and its mouth was smeared with blood. Mike screamed, and the thing bolted into the woods, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. We approached what it had been feeding on, and my stomach turned. It was a deer, or what was left of it, mangled and half-eaten. We ran back to the RV, locked the door, and didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, we packed up, ready to leave this nightmare behind. But as we were loading up, we found Sam's body. He was propped up against a tree, eyes wide open, his throat torn out. It was a sight that will haunt me forever. We got out of there fast, driving to the nearest town to report what we'd found. The police didn't believe us, of course. They thought it was a bear attack or something. They took our statements, but I could see they were skeptical. Mike and I never talked about it after that. We went our separate ways, the trip a dark memory we both tried to bury. I don't go camping anymore. I stick to places with lots of people around. But sometimes late at night, I think about that thing in the woods and wonder if it's still out there. I've done some research trying to figure out what it was. The closest I've come is a creature from local folklore, something they call Wendigo, but I can't be sure. All I know is it was real and it took my friend. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed. Complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The The air was cool, crisp with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine. Gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them. Carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it, a soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved, tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter and aimed the beam toward where I had seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped, the trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere. Slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning. Endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake. Trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Adirondacks, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right. and something's not right here. I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. What do you mean? You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it, he turned, starting back down the trail. Just don't stay too long. I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the adder, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. You get used to the rhythm of the road after a while, the hum of the engine beneath you, the steady pull of the truck, the highway stretching out like a never-ending ribbon. It's a kind of solitude I've come to appreciate over the years. I'm Ben Grady, though most folks call me Bear on account of my size, and I've been behind the wheel for a long time. Trucking's simple. You pick up a load, drop it off, and keep moving. That's what I liked about it. But this job was different from the start. I'd picked up the trailer in Chicago. The client was a slick, suited guy, one of those corporate types, barely even looked at me as he handed over the papers. "Keep the trailer locked," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No stops, no questions. I should have known something was off. The pay was double the usual rate, too good for a straightforward haul across I-80 to Salt Lake City. But I was behind on bills, and after the divorce, well, you don't say no to easy money. Now, somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, Nebraska, in the dead of night, that easy money was starting to feel like blood money. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant glow of farmhouses, but otherwise it was just me, my rig, and miles of flat highway. Nothing but darkness ahead and behind. My truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the white lines on the road, yet, but something about the blackness beyond felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I tried not to think too hard about it. Just keep driving, get to Salt Lake, drop the load, and forget about it. Simple. But then the first strange thing happened. The truck's temperature gauge started going haywire, flipping between cold and hot so fast I thought it was broken. First, the cab was freezing, then it was sweltering, all within minutes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and checked the engine. Everything looked fine. I chalked it up to a glitch in the electronics. These rigs are built to last, but every now and then, something acts up. Satisfied I wasn't about to fry the engine, I climbed back in. But as I settled into the driver's seat, I heard it, a soft thump from the trailer. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Something had moved in the back. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It's nothing, probably just the cargo shifting. Hell, I didn't even know what was in there, but heavy loads can settle like that. Still, a knot twisted in my gut. It was too quiet, too deliberate. For a second, I thought about checking the trailer, but the client's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it locked. No stops. No questions. Fine. I wasn't going to ask any questions, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break the lock. I fired up the engine and got back on the road, but the tension lingered. The temperature gauge flickered again. I adjusted the air vents, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. A few miles down the highway, the radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my seat. "Ben," a voice whispered through the static. I stared at the CB, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard another trucker's voice all night. The road was dead empty. The voice on the radio, though, it wasn't a trucker. It was my voice. I grabbed the mic, my knuckles white around it. "Who the hell is this?" The static fizzled, then came back stronger, hissing and popping in my ears. "Ben, you need to stop." I dropped the mic like it was burning my hand, cursing under my breath. It had to be a prank, someone screwing around on the frequency, maybe picking up my name from a previous broadcast, but that didn't make sense. The only chatter I'd had was hours ago, and I hadn't said much more than where I was heading. As I stared at the radio, a chill crawled over me. Then the trailer thumped again, louder this time. I jerked my eyes to the side mirror, half expecting to see something clawing its way out of the trailer. But all I saw was the dark outline of the rig behind me, its taillights glowing faintly in the blackness. Another thump, followed by a low scratching sound like nails on metal. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting out and checking the damn thing. To hell with the lock. Maybe the cargo had shifted. Maybe there was an animal in there. I didn't care. I just needed to know. I pulled over again, this time in the middle of nowhere. The road was surrounded by nothing but fields and distant silos. I climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin, and grabbed the key from my pocket. As I approached the back of the trailer, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was in there, it was alive. I unlocked the heavy padlock, my heart pounding in my ears, and swung open the doors. The smell hit me first. Not the musty smell of old cargo, but something far worse. A stench of decay, like something rotten in the dark. My stomach churned, but I lifted my flashlight and pointed it inside. For a moment, I thought the trailer was empty, but then I saw it. At the far end of the trailer, hunched in the shadows, was a figure. It was humanoid but twisted, like its body had been mangled and warped. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and slick, almost translucent. The thing was huddled against the wall, its back to me, but I could hear it breathing, shallow and rapid. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping back, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The thing turned its face, if you could call it that. It was a mess of raw red flesh, eyes sunken deep into its skull, staring at me with a mix of hunger and desperation. Its mouth opened in a wet, gaping maw, and I heard a low, guttural hiss escape its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My body screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were frozen to the spot. The creature moved, its elongated limbs unfolding as it dragged itself toward me. Each step was punctuated by the sickening sound of its flesh scraping against the metal floor. I didn't think. I just slammed the trailer door shut and fumbled with the lock. My fingers trembled so hard I could barely get it secured. The thing inside let out a shriek. A sound so unnatural, so piercing, it felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I stumbled back to the cab, my legs shaking beneath me, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? What did they put in my truck? I knew I couldn't stay parked on the side of the road, not with whatever that thing was still inside. I had to move, get away from here, but I also knew I couldn't drive that thing to Salt Lake. No way. Whatever was in the back of my trailer, it wasn't going to make it to its destination. I grabbed the CB mic again, my hand shaking. "This is Ben Grady." I hesitated, glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. "I need help. There's something in my trailer." Static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it again. "Ben, you need to stop." My voice, clearer this time, like it was coming from right beside me. I slammed the mic down, shifting into gear and pulling back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going anymore, just away. Away from that thing, away from whatever nightmare I'd gotten myself into. As I sped down the highway, the temperature gauge flickered again, this time dropping into the red. The cab grew colder. My breath was visible in the air, and I could hear the trailer groaning behind me. The thing inside was still moving, still scratching, trying to get out. The radio crackled one last time. "Ben, it's too late." I glanced at the dashboard. Every light was blinking. The engine sputtered as the temperature dropped even lower. I could feel the rig slowing, like the weight of the trailer was dragging it down. This, like whatever was inside, was getting heavier by the second. And then the truck stopped dead in the middle of the highway. The engine cut out. The lights flickered before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft, steady scratching from the trailer behind me. The door handle rattled, something pressed against the cab from the outside, its weight heavy enough to rock the truck. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what was trying to get in, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the door opened. That's the last I remember. When they found me the next morning, the rig was empty. No sign of the trailer, no sign of the cargo. Just me, sitting in the cab, frozen stiff, my breath still fogging in the cold morning air. I never asked what happened to the trailer. Some things are better left locked away. We thought we knew the Ozarks. Matt swore up and down that Mark Twain National Forest was a hidden gem. Untouched trails, beautiful vistas, perfect for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was always good at selling these kinds of trips, making it seem like a dream adventure. I believed him mostly because I loved him, but even then, as we parked the car at the trailhead and unloaded our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be different. "Looks like we're in for some real wilderness this time," Kyle said, flashing a grin. He was already making jokes about getting lost and being eaten by cryptids. Classic Kyle, always trying to lighten the mood. I laughed it off, but something about the dense trees and the isolation made the joke sit heavy in my chest. The forest felt too quiet, too vast. Matt, as usual, was all business. He was adjusting his pack, double-checking the map on his phone. "We'll follow the GPS for most of the way," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Should be easy, just a couple of tough climbs, but nothing we can't handle." I glanced at Sarah, who was tightening the straps on her hiking boots. She was always the tough one, competitive, never backing down from a challenge. I liked that about her, but sometimes it felt like she had something to prove, especially when Matt was around. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or rivalry. "Let's get moving," Matt called, waving us on. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The first day went as expected. We hiked deeper into the forest, leaving behind the marked trails and venturing into the heart of the wilderness. The trees were taller here, their branches heavy with green, creating a canopy that let in only slivers of sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, but Matt pressed on, oblivious to the creeping unease that gnawed at me. That night, we set up camp by a small stream. The air was cooler than I expected, a bite of cold that sank into my bones as the sun set. Kyle's tent had a broken pole, something he hadn't noticed until we tried setting it up. He laughed it off, saying he'd just sleep in Sarah's tent, but Matt's frustration was clear. "Next time, check your gear before we leave," Matt snapped, his voice tight. "Relax, man, it's just a tent pole," Kyle said, but the tension between them simmered. I was too tired to deal with their bickering, so I busied myself with starting the fire. Dana, my girlfriend, snapped photos as always, capturing the last glimmers of daylight filtered through the trees. She looked peaceful behind the camera, but I could tell she felt it too, that sense that something was off. That night, we heard the first howl. It was distant at first, almost like the wind moving through the trees, but then it came again. low and deep, rising into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet strapped to her pack. Matt shrugged, trying to play it off. Probably just a coyote or something. These woods are full of wildlife." But it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard. I exchanged a glance with Dana, and she raised her eyebrows in that way she did when she didn't believe something. Kyle, of course, took the opportunity to joke. "Sounds like Bigfoot's out there, or maybe the Ozark Howler," he said, his voice teasing. "You guys know that one, right? Big hairy creature, glowing red eyes, hunts hikers for fun." "Knock it off," Matt said sharply. "It's just an animal. Get some sleep. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I tried to brush it off too, but lying in our tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was restless sleep. The next morning, Dana told me she'd seen something outside the tent, just for a second, but she was sure of it. Red eyes. "I saw red eyes, Matt," she said softly. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have been half asleep. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, though even I didn't believe it. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams I'd had, the sensation of being watched, hunted, like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. Day 2 was worse. The forest grew denser, the path less defined, and the GPS signal flickered in and out. At one point, we lost it completely. Matt insisted he could still navigate using the map, but the landscape wasn't matching up with anything. The trees felt wrong, closer somehow, like they were moving in on us. The air grew colder and the silence pressed down like a weight. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly, glaring at Matt. "We're not lost," he snapped back. "I know where we are," but he didn't. None of us did. That night, we found claw marks on the trees. Deep gouges, like something had raked through the bark with claws far larger than any animal should have. Dana's hands trembled as she took pictures, but Matt dismissed it. "Could be a bear," he said, though the unease in his voice was obvious. "That's not a bear," Kyle muttered, his earlier joking tone gone. He stared at the claw marks, his face pale. "This is messed up, man. Maybe we should turn back." "We're not turning back," Matt said, his voice rising. "We've come this far. We stick to the plan." The argument that followed was inevitable. Sarah sided with Kyle, saying we were unprepared and it wasn't worth the risk. Dana stayed quiet, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Matt, stubborn as ever, refused to admit we were in over our heads. We set up camp again that night, and the howling returned. This time it was closer, louder, the sound reverberating through the trees like something was circling us. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of those red eyes watching us from the darkness. In the morning, we found more signs. Animal carcasses torn apart, strewn across the ground. Deer, mostly, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't make sense. No predator would kill like that, not for food. It was like something had ripped them apart for fun. Kyle was the first to voice what we were all thinking. "It's the howler, man. I'm telling you, this place is messed up." Matt, as always, refused to believe it. "It's just a predator. Wolves, maybe?" "There are no wolves in the Ozarks," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Not anymore." We kept moving, but the howls followed us, louder, closer. By late afternoon, we knew we weren't alone. We were being hunted. It was just before dusk when we saw it. We stopped to rest, setting our packs down near a small clearing. That's when Dana froze, her camera slipping from her hands. "Matt," she whispered, "behind you." I turned just in time to see it step out of the trees, hulking, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that burned through the dim light. Its body was massive, covered in thick dark fur, but its shape was wrong, twisted, like something caught between animal and something more. The howl that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard, a deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. It didn't charge, it didn't attack, it just stood there watching, as if daring us to move. We didn't. "What the hell is that?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, his face drained of color. "It's not real," Matt muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling now. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, its red eyes glowing brighter. Then, with one last bone-chilling howl, it slipped back into the trees. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We packed up in record time and started moving fast. Too fast. The light was fading, and we were stumbling over roots and rocks, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That night, we didn't set up camp. We just kept walking, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. The howls continued, closer, always closer. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. Its roof caved in, the windows shattered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We collapsed inside, too exhausted to keep going. For the first time in hours, the howling stopped. Matt stared at the floor, his face pale, his hands shaking. "It's not real," he whispered over and over again like a broken record. But we knew better. We had heard it, seen it. The Ozark Howler was real, and it had let us live, for now. As we sat in that ruined cabin, the forest watching, waiting, I realized we hadn't escaped, not really. The howler was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, immersed in the silence for hours. But now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life. Birds, insects, something, but the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique I'd brought along to mess around with in my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing. Until now. I stood up from the fire, walked over to the RV, and ducked inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers. 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the number started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing. I was sure of it. But the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong. Like the message wasn't for just anyone. It was for me. I shut the radio off. My fingers were trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods. The towering pines loomed overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, I shook it off and stepped back outside, trying to push the growing unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. "I heard it too," he said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal. The numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working, and my cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." There's a piece you find on the road late at night when the only thing lighting your way is your own headlights slicing through the dark. No noise, no distractions, just you, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of asphalt. That's why I love it out here. There's no mess, nothing like the life I left behind, just the road. My name's Lucas Turner, but most folks call me Lucky. It's an old nickname from when I used to get myself out of sticky situations, both on and off the road. I guess I've lived up to it, though I've never been one for superstition. If you stay calm and keep moving forward, things usually work out. But that night on Route 2, the nickname didn't feel so fitting anymore. I'd left Seattle earlier that day, hauling a load of electronics to a distribution center in North Dakota. A long stretch of mostly empty highway lay between me and the drop-off, but I didn't mind. It was a quiet night, just the way I liked it. No cars, no people, just the stars overhead and the empty plains around me. The deeper I drove into Montana, the quieter it got. Nothing but the hum of my rig and the occasional flicker of static on the CB. But somewhere along that desolate stretch of US Route 2, the static changed. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It started to sound like something trying to break through. A faint voice hidden in the distortion. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear it up, but all I got was more static. After a few minutes, the voice faded, and I figured it was just some distant radio chatter from a passing trucker. I wasn't tired yet, but I was getting there. I hadn't slept much since the divorce, and nights like this, long and quiet, always gave me too much time to think. Sometimes you drive to outrun what's on your mind. Problem is, it's always waiting for you when you stop. Just as I was about to switch the CB off and turn up my music, the radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer, a low monotone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 7052, it said, repeating the number slowly like it was reading coordinates. I grabbed the mic and keyed up. "This is Lucky Turner, eastbound on Route 2. You got a copy?" Nothing. Just static. Then, the voice again, quieter this time. 7052, you need to stop. I frowned, the words sending a chill through me. I hadn't heard anyone nearby on the CB all night, so where the hell was this coming from? I glanced at the GPS out of habit, but it showed nothing unusual, just the straight road ahead. I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease. About an hour later, the same numbers came through again. But this time, it wasn't just numbers. "Lucas." I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road so fast the rig shuddered beneath me. The voice had said my name. I cut the engine, my heart racing. The radio was dead silent now, nothing but the low hum of static, like the voice had never been there at all. I rubbed my hands together, trying to calm down. It had to be some kind of weird signal bounce, maybe from a nearby base, old military broadcasts or something. That happens sometimes out here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped out of the cab, needing to clear my head, and breathed in the cold, crisp night air. The road was dead empty. Nothing but flat plains and dark woods on either side. No headlights, no signs of life. I walked around the truck, stretching my legs, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I glanced down the road, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another trucker, but the lights didn't seem to be moving. They just sat there. I watched for a minute, waiting for the truck to approach, but it never did. The lights stayed exactly where they were, flickering slightly in the dark. Something about them didn't feel right. It was like they were watching me. "Don't be an idiot, Lucky," I muttered to myself, climbing back into the cab. But as I settled into the driver's seat and fired up the engine again, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still there, even as I pulled away. I pushed the truck hard, wanting to put some distance between me and whatever was behind me. But the farther I drove, the more the radio interference grew. It was subtle at first, just little bursts of static, but then it got louder, and within that static, I could hear it again. "Lucas, 7-5E2. I checked the mirrors, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw the convoy. 3 trucks, old military rigs by the look of them. They were in a tight formation, following about 100 yards behind me. I hadn't passed them on the road, hadn't seen them pull out from anywhere. They were just there, like they'd appeared out of nowhere. My grip tightened on the wheel. I had 2 options: stop and let them pass, or keep going and pretend like nothing was wrong. My gut told me to keep going, but no matter how fast I drove, the trucks stayed right behind me, their headlights burning bright in the dark, and that voice, Eddie's voice, kept slipping through the static on the CB. "You need to stop, Lucas." I slammed my fist on the dashboard, adrenaline surging through me. This couldn't be real. Eddie was dead, had been for years, and yet his voice kept coming, clear as day, telling me to stop. I passed a small sign on the roadside. Deadwood Ridge, 2 miles. That's where the voice had been leading me. 752. It was a set of coordinates. Coordinates that pointed directly to Deadwood Ridge. I didn't want to go there. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to get as far away as possible. But the voice, Eddie's voice, had a pull I couldn't shake. Something was waiting for me there. Something I had to face. When the turnoff for Deadwood Ridge appeared, my hands moved before my mind could catch up. I took the exit. The old, narrow road wound through thick trees, and as soon as I turned, the convoy behind me vanished. Just like that, gone. The road twisted and turned, narrowing with every mile until I came to an old gate, rusted, broken, hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, hidden in the woods, I could see the remains of an old military base, abandoned, decaying, like something out of a nightmare. I cut the engine and stepped out into the cold, my breath fogging in the air. The place was silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. My gut told me to leave, but my feet kept moving, pulling me toward the base. Inside the fence, I found an old radio tower. Its rusted skeleton still stood against the night sky. At the base of the tower, there was a small building, just a single room, the door hanging open. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the broken concrete, and that's when I saw it. An old military radio, still running, its dials glowing faintly in the dark. The static from the CB was coming from here, filling the room with that same eerie hum I'd heard on the road. And then, from the radio, Eddie's voice again. "Lucas, it's time to stop." The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt something behind me, something watching. I turned, and there he was, Eddie, standing in the doorway, just as he had been the day he died. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, his expression blank. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eddie!" He didn't respond, just stared at me, unmoving. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words choking out of me. "I should have been there. I should have." Eddie's face twisted. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and suddenly the radio exploded in a burst of static. The air around me felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, and I staggered back, my pulse racing. "Lucas!" Eddie's voice rasped from the radio, distorted and wrong. "Stop now." The lights in the building flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When they came back on, Eddie was gone. The radio was silent. I didn't wait for an explanation. I bolted out of the building, ran back to the truck, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. The engine roared as I tore down the road. I didn't look back, didn't check the mirrors. I just drove. When I finally got back on Route 2, the radio was silent. No static, no voices, just the empty road and the stars overhead. I never did figure out what happened that night. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was something else, but I know one thing. I don't drive that stretch of road anymore. Whatever was out there, whatever was calling me to that place, it's something best left alone. Some things, once you hear them, never stop echoing. My name is Ronan Gonzalez, and this happened to me on October 14th, 1999. I was 33 at the time, working a steady job as a machinist in Dayton, Ohio. I needed a break from the grind, so I decided to take the RV out for a week. Just me and the open road. My buddy, Dave Holt, said he'd tag along. Dave was an old friend, the kind you could sit in silence with, and it would still feel like a conversation. We'd both been itching for a good old-fashioned camping trip, so we planned to hit the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. We left early on a Saturday morning, driving through the quiet pre-dawn hours. The drive was easy, the sun rising slowly, casting long shadows across the highway. Dave and I talked about nothing and everything. Work, women, the sorry state of the Bengals, normal stuff. We made it to the forest by mid-afternoon, found a good spot by the river, and set up camp. The RV was a 1986 Winnebago, not fancy but comfortable. We parked it under a canopy of trees, leaves turning gold and red with the fall. The first couple of days were perfect. We fished, hiked, and cooked over the fire. The air was crisp, the river sang, and the nights were clear. On the third day, though, things took a turn. We decided to hike deeper into the forest, looking for a stream Dave swore had the best trout fishing. We'd been walking for about 2 hours when we stumbled across something strange. It was a clearing, but not a natural one. The trees had been hacked down, the ground scarred by deep ruts like something heavy had been dragged through. "Looks like someone's been here with machinery," Dave said, frowning. "Doesn't make sense," I replied. "We're miles from any roads." We poked around a bit, but there wasn't much to see, just the eerie silence of the forest, the kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up. We shrugged it off and moved on, but the unease stayed with us. That night, back at the RV, we sat by the fire trying to shake off the weird vibe. Dave cracked open a couple of beers, and we tried to laugh it off. "Probably just some logging crew that got lost," Dave said. "Yeah, maybe," I agreed, though I didn't believe it. Something felt wrong about that clearing. We turned in early, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside, soft rustling that could have been the wind, but didn't quite sound like it. Around midnight, there was a loud crash, like something heavy had fallen. Dave and I bolted upright, grabbing flashlights and stepping outside. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, everything eerily still. But there, about 20 feet from the RV, was a massive tree branch, snapped clean off and lying across our fire pit. We looked at each other, the same question in our eyes. What could have done that? The next day, we decided to stay close to camp. Neither of us said it, but we were both on edge. The air seemed heavier, the forest quieter. We spent the day fishing by the river, trying to distract ourselves, but the unease lingered. That night, we built the fire higher and stayed up later. Both of us jumpy at every snap of a twig. Around 2 a.m., we heard it, a low, guttural sound. Not quite an animal, but not human either. It echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. We stood up, flashlights scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. The sound came again, closer this time. Dave grabbed the hatchet from the firewood pile, and I armed myself with a heavy branch. "Whatever it is, it's getting closer," Dave whispered. We backed up to the RV, our eyes darting around the clearing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow larger than any animal I'd ever seen, darting between the trees. Dave saw it too, and we both froze. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Before I could answer, the shadow moved again, this time into the clearing. It was massive, hunched over, but still towering, with limbs too long and joints bent at odd angles. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting our flashlight beams. It moved with a strange, jerky grace, like it didn't quite belong in this world. We didn't wait to find out more. Dave swung the hatchet as I yelled, and we both ran back into the RV, slamming the door behind us. The creature let out a strange, high-pitched wail, and the RV shook as it slammed against the side. "Start the engine!" Dave shouted. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking, but finally got the engine roaring. We tore out of there, the creature's wails fading into the night. We didn't stop driving until we hit a small town a couple of hours away. We parked at a well-lit gas station and sat there, hearts pounding, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Dave was the first to speak. "What the hell was that thing?" "I don't know," I said, "but we're not going back to find out." We reported it to the local authorities, but they looked at us like we were crazy. two guys from out of town spooked by shadows. They humored us, took down our statements, but we could tell they didn't believe a word. We cut the trip short and headed back to Dayton. Dave and I didn't talk much on the drive home, each of us lost in our thoughts. We never went camping again after that. Whatever was in that forest, we didn't want to risk running into it again. Years passed and we drifted apart. Life got in the way, as it often does. I'd think about that night sometimes, the way it changed everything. I'd tell the story at bars, but it always felt like a campfire tale, something that happened to someone else. People would laugh, call it a good ghost story. Only Dave and I knew the truth. One day I got a call from Dave's wife. He'd gone missing, last seen heading out for a solo camping trip back to the same forest. They found his truck, but not him. The authorities said it was probably an accident, maybe a fall, or maybe he got lost. But I knew better. Whatever was out there, it had gotten him. I never went back to the Allegheny National Forest. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear that strange wail in my dreams, see those glowing eyes in the dark. I came to know the creature by a name that seemed to fit its eerie presence, the Wendigo. A name pulled from folklore, but somehow it felt right. It was something ancient, something that didn't belong in our world, but was trapped here all the same. Years turned into decades, and I tried to move on, but there are some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. Some nights, I'd sit on my porch looking out into the darkness and wonder if the Wendigo was still out there, waiting. Dave never came back, and neither did my peace of mind. The forest held its secrets close, and I learned to respect that. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some nightmares, no matter how much you drink or laugh them off, never really go away. I'd been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed. A break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me. The way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it. A faint sound, almost too soft to notice, a rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft, rhythmic pulse, like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night, but every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here, something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head, starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker, or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old, light-faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, The beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. I never wanted to take the job. Not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened, saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare, unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going gray, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route. Route 163 through the heart of Monument Valley and then up through Dead Man's Pass, the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first, static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago, no reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered, just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same. And it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheels slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life and a voice broke through the static. Rusty, Hank, you gotta stop. I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. Eddie, I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. Rusty, you gotta stop. You can't make the same mistake. I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. Damn it! I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time, I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking. And then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there, as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How are you? He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. The wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. No, I whispered. This can't be real. Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running. I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. I'm sorry, I choked out, tears burning my eyes. I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped. The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment it sounded like Eddie was speaking again. But this time it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. I never blamed you, Rusty. His voice whispered softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. But you gotta forgive yourself. The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon. And then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady, as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled, tired smile. It was time to stop running. Time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. My name is Paxton Black, and I'm 25 years old. This happened just a few months ago during the tail end of summer at Quare River State Park in Missouri. I make my living as a travel writer, specializing in out-of-the-way places most people overlook. I've camped in deserts, forests, and mountains, slept through blizzards and heat waves, and I've never thought of myself as someone easily rattled. But that trip to Quare River changed me. I can't even look at a forest now without thinking of what I saw. I was there to write a piece about underrated camping spots. My editor thought it would be a refreshing change of pace from the glitzy, overcrowded locations I usually covered. I agreed, thinking it might even be therapeutic. An escape from the constant reminders of my divorce, the cold silence of my empty apartment, and the gnawing feeling that my life had gone off the rails. I parked my RV in a secluded area near the Whispering Pines Trail, far from the other campers. The quiet felt inviting at first, but as I unpacked my gear, something about the air shifted. It wasn't the kind of silence you'd expect in the wilderness. It was deeper, heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Ralph, the campground manager, had mentioned the Whispering Pines Trail in passing. "It's beautiful up there," he said, "but I wouldn't recommend camping too close. Folks say it's not right." I laughed it off, thinking he was trying to spook me, but as night fell, his words lingered. The pine trees loomed around me like towering shadows, their needle-clad branches swaying gently in the breeze. I was sitting by a small campfire, editing some notes on my laptop when I first heard it: laughter. It was faint, high-pitched, and unmistakably the laughter of children. I froze. The nearest campers were at least half a mile away, and I hadn't seen any kids when I arrived. I turned off my laptop and listened. The laughter came again, this time closer. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside the RV, my heart pounding. The laughter stopped, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves. I shone the light across the forest, but there was nothing, just the swaying trees and the faint outline of the trail disappearing into the woods. Then I saw them. Small footprints in the dirt, heading toward the Whispering Pines Trail. The next morning, I convinced myself the laughter had been the wind. I'd heard stories of how the mind could play tricks when you're alone in the wilderness. Still, as I followed the Whispering Pines Trail to gather material for my article, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. The trail twisted through dense woods, the canopy so thick that sunlight barely filtered through. About an hour in, I noticed carvings on the trees, simple at first, like the kind kids might make, but they grew more elaborate the further I walked. There were strange symbols, circles with intersecting lines, crude stick figures, and spirals that seemed to twist endlessly. Some of the carvings looked fresh, the bark still raw and bleeding sap. I snapped a few photos, but when I reviewed them, the images were distorted, filled with static and streaks of light. I frowned, blaming my old camera, but deep down I felt a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. By midday, I'd stumbled upon something strange, a rusted swing set hidden deep in the woods, its chains creaking softly in the breeze. The sight stopped me in my tracks. There was no reason for it to be there. No picnic areas, no signs of a campsite, just this decaying remnant of someone's forgotten past. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching on the dry needles that blanketed the ground. Near the swing set, half buried in the dirt, was a small shoe. It was faded and cracked, the kind of thing that might belong to a child from decades ago. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. A chill ran down my spine. The shoe was still warm. That evening, the forest seemed even darker than before. I kept my flashlight close and locked the RV's doors before settling in for the night. I tried to write, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the swing set and the shoe. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of tapping, soft and rhythmic, like small hands drumming on the RV windows. My heart leapt into my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, grabbing my flashlight. The tapping stopped. I hesitated for what felt like an eternity before stepping outside. The forest was eerily quiet again, the air thick with an almost tangible weight. Then I saw it, a dusty old doll lying on the ground, its button eyes staring blankly up at me. I looked around, shining the flashlight in every direction, but the forest was empty, or so I thought. When I turned back toward the RV, I saw them, figures standing just at the edge of the light. They were small, no taller than children. Their faces were pale and indistinct, like smudged photographs. The figures didn't move, but I could feel their eyes on me. Panic surged through me, and I bolted back inside the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. Shadows darted past the windows, and faint whispers filled the air. They sounded like children's voices, overlapping in a chaotic chorus, but I couldn't make out the words. The next day, desperate for answers, I drove to the nearest town and visited the local library. An old woman at the desk seemed hesitant when I asked about the Whispering Pines Trail, but eventually she brought out a box of yellowed newspapers. The articles painted a grim picture. In the 1930s, a group of children from a nearby orphanage had gone missing during a summer camping trip. Their bodies were never found, and the case remained unsolved. The area had been abandoned soon after, left to rot under the weight of tragedy. One photo caught my eye, a grainy image of the children lined up in front of the swing set I'd found in the woods. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I returned to the forest and retraced my steps. This time, I ventured deeper, following a faint trail that seemed to appear and disappear at random. Eventually, I came across an old, dilapidated cabin, its walls covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The floor was littered with toys, dolls, wooden blocks, marbles, all caked in dust. On the walls, crude carvings depicted stick figures surrounded by flames. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter again, faint and echoing. That night, a storm rolled in, trapping me in the RV. Lightning illuminated the forest in brief, blinding flashes, and thunder rattled the windows. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, accompanied by the sound of small feet running circles around the RV. Then the children appeared inside. They didn't open the door or crawl through a window. They were just there, pale and translucent, their eyes wide and empty. They stared at me, their mouths moving soundlessly. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. My flashlight died, plunging the RV into darkness. As the storm raged outside, my mind was flooded with images, not memories, but something else. I saw the children's last moments, the fire consuming the cabin, their screams as they tried to escape, and the counselor who failed to save them. The children weren't just haunting the forest. They were trapped in it, reliving their deaths over and over, unable to move on. Desperate, I gathered the doll and the toys I'd found, piling them outside the RV. I doused them with lighter fluid and lit a match. The flames roared to life, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. The storm ceased abruptly, leaving the forest eerily still. The children were gone. I left Queer River State Park the next morning, my hands trembling on the wheel. I never finished the article. Some stories, I realized, aren't meant to be told. But even now, as I write this, I can feel their presence, a faint tap on the window, a whisper just out of earshot, a reminder that some tragedies can't be left behind. It was still dark when I arrived at Devil's Tower. The silhouette of the monolith rose above the horizon like a jagged alien structure. The first light of dawn barely touched the sky, but the outline was unmistakable. This place had always felt otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to the same earth the rest of us walked on. I parked the RV in the farthest corner of the campground, away from the few other visitors scattered throughout the park. I wanted isolation, needed it, actually after months of losing myself in work and failing to fix my crumbling marriage. I thought this trip might offer me some clarity. If nothing else, I had my research to keep me focused. Legends of Devil's Tower had fascinated me for years, but one in particular always stuck out, the legend of the Watcher. Native tribes in the region spoke of a spirit that guarded the tower, a being that offered ancient knowledge to those who sought it but demanded a steep price in return. As a history professor obsessed with ancient folklore, I couldn't resist the lure of that story. I had come to Wyoming to dig deeper into those legends, hoping to uncover something, anything that might be hiding in the shadows of the tower. I stepped out of the RV, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. The towering spires of pine trees loomed around me, creating an unsettling sense of isolation. I unpacked my gear, set up camp, and grabbed my notebook. The plan was simple: hike around the base of the tower, take some notes, and maybe, just maybe, find something that would finally make all the pieces click. As I set out toward the trail that led to the tower, I passed an older man in a park ranger uniform, grizzled with deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, though, alert in a way that made me feel like he saw more than the average person. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning," I replied, glancing briefly at his name tag. "Tom, you here for the sights or something else?" His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. I hesitated. "Research, mostly. I'm looking into some of the old Native American stories about the tower." He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking toward Devil's Tower. "The Watcher, huh?" I stopped. I hadn't mentioned that specific legend, he chuckled softly. Everyone comes looking for something. But you do well to leave the Watcher alone, son. Some things don't like being disturbed. I tried to brush off his warning with a nervous laugh. You don't really believe that, do you, Tom? He didn't smile. Doesn't matter what I believe, just be careful. People who go digging too deep around here sometimes find more than they bargain for. With that, he turned and walked back toward the ranger station, leaving me standing there with a pit forming in my stomach. I told myself it was just local superstition, the kind of thing park rangers said to spook tourists. But as I turned my eyes back to the tower, the weight of his words lingered. By midday, I was deep into my hike, circling the base of the tower, taking notes on the surrounding landscape. The towering rock formation loomed overhead, casting long shadows over the forest below. I felt dwarfed by it, like a child standing at the feet of a giant. That's when I noticed the eyes. At first, I thought it was a trick of the glimmer of sunlight catching on something in the trees. But then I saw them again, faint, glowing orbs between the branches. They were high up, too high to be an animal, and they followed my every movement. I stopped walking, my heart pounding. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered there, watching. I wanted to dismiss them as some kind of wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them, something intelligent. Forcing myself to continue, I kept walking, occasionally glancing over my shoulder to see if the eyes were still there. They were always just far enough away to keep me wondering, but close enough that I could feel their presence. When I finally made it back to camp, the unease hadn't left me. I sat by the RV trying to write in my notebook, but my mind kept drifting back to the eyes and the trees, the way they'd followed me, never straying too far, but never coming closer either. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the campground in shadow. The tower loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the purple sky. The fire I'd started crackled weakly, the flames flickering as if they, too, were uncertain about staying here. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I was a rational man, after all. A professor, a skeptic. But as the night wore on, that skepticism started to feel more like denial. The wind rustled through the trees, and the fire guttered low. Then, just as the last light of the day faded, I heard it. A whistle. It started softly, almost like the wind, but it was too distinct, too deliberate. A single, drawn-out note that drifted through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood, scanning the darkness. The fire cast faint light around the camp. "Hello?" I called, though I wasn't sure what I expected to hear in return. The whistle came again, sharper this time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam into the trees, but there was nothing, no movement. Just the oppressive stillness of the forest. The whistling stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat back down, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the trees made me bolt upright, expecting to see those glowing eyes or hear that eerie whistle again. I told myself it was just my imagination, just nerves from being out here alone. But the uneasy feeling stuck with me, settling deep in my bones. The next day, I set out again, hoping to shake the paranoia that had settled over me. I hadn't gone far when I ran into Julie, a solo traveler I'd briefly noticed the day before. She was standing at the edge of the trail, staring up at Devil's Tower, a strange look on her face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said as I approached, though her tone didn't match her words. There was something off about the way she spoke, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Yeah," I replied. "I've been hiking around, looking into the old legends. You know about the Watcher?" She turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "The Watcher? You're looking for it?" I nodded, uneasy. "It's just research." Julie's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Watcher doesn't like to be found. You know, it watches, but it doesn't want to be seen." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about her was wrong. She seemed too calm, too knowing. The way she stared at me made my skin crawl. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked back toward her campsite, leaving me standing there, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. That night, the whistling returned, louder this time, persistent. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight, eyes darting between the trees. The whistle circled the campsite, moving closer then further away like it was testing me, toying with me. Then, just beyond the flickering light of the fire, I saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, as a standing at the edge of the woods. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, and his mouth was pursed as the tuneless whistle drifted from his lips. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure didn't answer. He just stood there, whistling that same eerie note. My chest tightened with a sudden surge of panic. I stumbled back toward the RV, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. When I looked up, he was gone. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me. The sound of my breath was too loud in the confined space. The next morning, I found footprints around the campsite, small indentations in the dirt leading in circles around the fire. They hadn't been there before. On the final night, I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams of Devil's Tower had become unbearable. Nightmares of the stone pulsing, breathing like a living thing. I dreamt of eyes, hundreds of them, watching me from the shadows, always watching. I had to go to the tower. I had to see it up close. I grabbed my gear and set out under the cover of darkness, the whistle guiding me, pulling me toward the monolith. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The stars above twisted and shifted, unfamiliar constellations blinking in and out of existence. As I neared the base of the tower, I saw her again, Julie, standing at the foot of the rock, her face pale and her smile too wide. "The Watcher is waiting," she whispered. "It's always been waiting." The whistle grew louder, piercing through my thoughts, driving me forward. I reached the tower, my hands trembling as I touched the cold stone. And then, out of the shadows, the Watcher appeared. It was a massive shadowy figure, its body indistinguishable from the darkness, but its eyes, glowing, burning orbs that stared into me through me. It didn't speak with words, but its presence filled my mind, offering me ancient knowledge, secrets of the tower, of the universe, of myself. But the price, I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The more I listened, the more I realized that accepting its offer would mean losing everything. My mind, my soul, everything that made me, me. I stumbled back, tearing myself away from the Watcher's gaze. The whistle reached a fever pitch, and I ran. The ground beneath me shifted and warped as the world collapsed around me. I barely made it back to the RV. When I crossed the threshold, the whistling stopped. The forest fell silent. I drove away as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The image of the Watcher's eyes burned into my mind. I knew I would never be the same. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last, but something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call, or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert, as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70 heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive, needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister, bones to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit working and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping. No, not tapping, scratching. It was coming from the crate, a large wooden crate strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there, but my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted just slightly, as though something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it. Not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B. No questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought, some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static, then through the fuzz I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days. That's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people, ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long, flowing dresses, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched hard like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there, nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again, then came the knocking. Loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open, and then everything stopped, the wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out. One voice I knew. "Roy." I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder, and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I had ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I could see them again. The figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar, faces I'd seen on the road before, long dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her, Carol, standing in the middle of the road. Her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone, no signal, no way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again. Carol, walking slowly toward me. Her face pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting as the darkness closed in around me. You won't believe the craziness that went down last year. I still can't wrap my head around it, but here's how it all started. My name is Logan Banner. Yeah, that's me, the guy who had the weirdest day in the history of weird days. You see, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. It's a small town called Macaro. Ever heard of it? Yeah, me neither. Until I had to move there when I was 12 because my mom got some job she couldn't pass up. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and nothing ever happens. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty grounded guy, someone who doesn't buy into all the supernatural mumbo jumbo. But man, after what I went through, I don't know anymore. It was a Friday. I remember because I had taken the day off to go hiking up in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. I've always loved being outdoors. It clears my head. I was up there just minding my own business, soaking in the peace and quiet. There was this old trail that not many people used anymore. It was kind of my secret spot. So there I was, walking along this trail when I heard something behind me. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling the leaves, but then I heard it again. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Weird, right? I shook it off and kept walking. About half an hour later, I stumbled upon this old cabin. I'd never seen it before, and I'd been hiking those mountains for years. It looked abandoned, with vines growing all over it and the windows boarded up. Naturally, I was curious. I mean, who wouldn't be? So I decided to check it out. As I got closer, I noticed something off. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I walked up to the door, which was hanging off its hinges, and stepped inside. The place was a mess. Old furniture covered in dust, cobwebs everywhere, and a smell that made me gag. It smelled like something had died in there. I was about to turn around and leave when I heard it again. Those footsteps. But this time, they were inside the cabin. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I looked around, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but I couldn't see anything. That's when I felt the hand on my shoulder. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. There was nobody there. I'm not kidding, the place was empty. I don't scare easily, but at that moment I was ready to bolt. Before I could move, I heard a voice. It was faint, like a whisper, but I could make out the words, "Help me." Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just get the hell out of there? Trust me, I wanted to, but something about that voice made me stay. It sounded so desperate, so helpless. Against my better judgment, I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No response, just silence. I took a deep breath and decided to follow the sound. It seemed to be coming from the back of the cabin. As I made my way through the debris, I noticed a trapdoor in the floor. It was partially open with a set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my flashlight from my backpack and started down the stairs. The basement was even worse than the cabin above it. It was damp and cold with mold growing on the walls. I shined my flashlight around, looking for any signs of life. That's when I saw her. A young woman, probably in her 20s, chained to the wall. She looked terrified, her clothes torn and dirty, with bruises all over her body. She was shivering. I rushed over to her and tried to break the chains, but they were solid metal. "Who did this to you?" I asked, but she just shook her head, too scared to speak. I tried to reassure her, telling her I would get her out of there, but honestly, I didn't know how. That's when I heard the footsteps again, this time coming down the stairs. I turned around, ready to face whoever was coming, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with matted fur and long, sharp claws. Its face was a grotesque mix of human and animal features, and it was staring right at me with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed a piece of wood from the floor and held it out in front of me like a makeshift weapon. "Stay back," I yelled, but the creature just snarled and started toward me. I swung the wood as hard as I could, but it barely made a dent. The creature swatted it away like it was nothing and lunged at me. I managed to dodge at the last second, but I wasn't fast enough. Its claws raked across my arm, tearing through my jacket and into my skin. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't have time to think about it. I grabbed the woman and pulled her behind me, trying to shield her from the creature. It backed us into a corner, its eyes locked on mine. I knew we were in deep trouble. That's when I remembered the flare gun in my backpack. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I fumbled to get it out, my hand shaking, and aimed it at the creature. "Come on, you ugly bastard," I muttered under my breath, and pulled the trigger. The flare hit the creature in the chest, and it let out a roar of pain. It stumbled back, smoke rising from the wound. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the woman's hand, and we ran up the stairs as fast as we could. The creature was right behind us, but the flare had slowed it down enough for us to get a head start. We burst out of the cabin and into the daylight. I didn't stop running until we were well away from the cabin. My heart was pounding in my ears. Finally, we collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The woman was crying, and I put my arm around her, trying to comfort her. "It's okay," I said, even though I wasn't sure it was. "We're safe now." After a few minutes, I pulled out my phone and called the police. They showed up about an hour later, along with an ambulance. They took the woman to the hospital, and I gave my statement to the officer. I told them everything that had happened, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I mean, who would? It sounded like something out of a horror movie. A few days later, I went back to the cabin with a couple of friends. We were armed this time, just in case, but when we got there, the place was gone. I'm not talking about destroyed or burned down. I mean, it was like it had never existed. There was no sign of the cabin, the basement, or the creature, just an empty clearing in the woods. We searched the area, but there was nothing. No footprints, no claw marks, nothing. It was like the whole thing had been a bad dream. But I know what I saw, and I have the scars to prove it. I kept in touch with the woman, whose name was Alara. She didn't remember much about how she ended up in that cabin, just that she had been hiking in the mountains, and then everything went black. She was grateful that I found her, but she was as confused as I was about the whole thing. The police eventually closed the case, chalking it up to a wild animal attack. They didn't find any evidence of the creature, and without the cabin, there was nothing to go on. But I know it's still out there somewhere in those mountains, and every time I go hiking, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I guess the moral of the story is, don't go poking around in places you don't belong. You never know what you might find or what might find you. The end, or maybe just the beginning. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels under heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold out. I was deep into the wilderness now, the place I'd picked to spend a week. Just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I'd been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. The solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time, I was here to ice fish, maybe snap a few photos for my nature blog, but mostly I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it. The cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop by a small frozen lake I'd scouted on a map. It was miles away from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just how I liked it. I stepped out into the icy air, my breath fogging in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching out into the distance where the trees disappeared into a blur of white. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I grabbed my auger, trudged out onto the ice, and started drilling a hole. The sound of the blade biting into the ice echoed through the stillness, sharp and harsh against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it, a deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, the auger still in my hands, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration like the ice shifting far beneath the surface. I'd heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sound of a lake adjusting to the freeze, but this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost like something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I'd done this 100 times before, and the routine was comforting. But that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out at the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were starting to appear in the clear sky above, bright and distant. Then I saw it. A light, faintly flickering and coming from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moonlight hitting the ice in just the right way. But as I watched, the light moved slow and steady, as if something was drifting beneath the surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, faint and regular, like a lantern swaying beneath the ice. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the lake. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment, then dimming again, always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection of something from the sky. But deep down, I knew better. There was no one else out here, no one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing. The light, the sound, something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced back toward the hole I'd drilled the day before. Something was off. There, by the edge of the hole, was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. The crack hadn't been there yesterday. It's snaked out in a jagged line, like as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the crack, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. I leaned closer, peering into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the cold water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine, but there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth, like it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again, louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice, closer than before. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold sweat break out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound, it all pointed to something beneath the ice. Something unnatural. But what? The stories I had heard over the years about strange things beneath the frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice, came flooding back. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, campfire stories to scare the newcomers, but now, standing there in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering more firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake that looked abandoned. But there were fresh footprints in the snow, leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing the door open. Inside, I found an older man hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and he looked up at me with tired eyes as I stepped in. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice, and I saw a light last night moving beneath the surface. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake, abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there. Ever since, strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't, and that light, it's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV, but as I started the engine, the ground beneath the RV began to tremble. The rumbling was almost deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced out toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading out from the center of the lake. And then, in the distance, the surface of the ice exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I only caught a glimpse, something dark and enormous, sliding beneath the ice again, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But it was enough. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward as I raced away from the lake, the sound of cracking ice echoing behind me. The road was a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I drove, I could still feel it, the weight of something massive beneath the surface. Watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, the rumbling stopped. But the memory of that thing beneath the ice stayed with me. I'll never forget it. The way the light pulsed, the way the ice cracked as if it were alive. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried, and whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet.